morning, good evening, good afternoon, and remember, Context is Everything Media Network founder and CEO John Michael is reading a textbook cover to cover. Today, we start a new chapter in this textbook, chapter 26, New Global Patterns from 1800 to, you guessed it, 1914. So let's see if we can culminate in World War I by the end of this chapter, because we've been building up to it for some time now. Check out the previous videos. I'll link the first sections of each chapter throughout the first 5 minutes of this video, so you can catch up about this context for World War I, which has been brewing for the past about 150 pages of this book, which is suiting because it's a big deal, right? New Global Patterns, Chapter 26, 1800 to 1914. Let's get started. Please like, please subscribe. John Michael, Context is Everything Media Network founder and CEO, CFO, and social media manager. Social media manager says like, subscribe. This is the sign for subscribe. This is the sign for like. Also put this on for your little dog as the radio when you're away. It's a good idea for them to keep company, and it's a good idea for the channel. Just put the thing on loop. I got plenty of playlists and a lot of content. The dog will be very happy and learn a lot about Japanese modernization, Section 1. Setting the scene. In 1853, the United States displayed its new military might, sending a naval force to make Japan open its ports to trade. Japanese leaders debated how to respond. While some resisted giving up their 250-year-old policy of seclusion, others felt it would be wiser to learn from the foreigners. One Japanese lord pointed out, I can't do a Japanese accent, I'm going to do a British accent. One Japanese lord pointed out, there is no saying that when one is besieged in a castle to rise the drawbridge to imprison oneself. Even though the shogun's ancestors set up seclusion laws, they left the Dutch and Chinese to act as a bridge. Might this bridge not now be of advantage to us, providing us with the means whereby we may, for a time, avert the outbreak of hostilities, and then, after some time has elapsed, gain a complete victory. Lee Naosuke, quoted in selected documents on foreign policy in Japan by Beasley. That guy sounds British. At the end, Japan chose to abandon its centuries of isolation and learn from the West. The country swiftly transformed itself into a model industrial power and then set out on its own imperialist path. Oh no, I need sunglasses. 1 second. That was close. New heading, hence the glasses. Discontent in Tokugawa, Japan. After the Tokugawa shogun gained power in the 1600s, they reimposed centralized feudalism, closed Japan to foreigners, and forbade Japanese to travel overseas. The nation's only window on the world was through Nagasaki, where the Dutch were allowed very limited trade. For more than 200 years, Japan developed in isolation. Although internal commerce expanded, economic changes introduced severe strains on Japanese society. By the 1800s, shoguns had no longer strong leaders, and corruption was common. Discontent simmered throughout Japan. Many daimyo suffered financial hardship. I don't remember what daimyo are, and the book is assuming that I remember. without a definition. Money was needed in commercial economy, but the daimyo's wealth was in land rather than cash. Daimyo also had a heavy expense of maintaining households in both Edo and their own domains. Lesser samurai were unhappy, too, because they were no longer fighters. Many were bureaucrats. Even though they were noble, they lacked the money to live as well as urban merchants. Samurai were bureaucrats? Why are they called samurai? Merchants, in turn, resented their place at the bottom of the social ladder. No matter how rich they were, they had no political power. Peasants, meanwhile, suffered under heavy taxes. The government responded by trying to revive old ways, emphasizing farming over commerce and praising traditional values. These efforts at reform, however, had scant success. Many groups felt little loyalty to old systems. Opening up Japan. New heading. While the shoguns faced troubles at home, distributing news reached disturbing news reached them from abroad during the 1830s and 1840s. He was alarmed by the news that British victory over China in an open opium war. Even more disturbing was the way in which imperialists had forced China to sign the unequal treaties. Surely the shogun reasoned it would not be long before Western powers began seeking trading rights in Japan. Wait a minute. Opium was introduced to China by the British in the Opium War? That was in the reading yesterday, and if that's the case, if they didn't have poppies growing in China before that, how bizarre would it be that some country just said, this is illegal in our nation, and we're going to give it to you to make money. And we're going to fight a war to impose that we can continue to give you this poisonous substance that's degrading your society, opium. And the Chinese fought a war to say, please stop. And the British said no. Fought a war, won, and continued to give them these society-crumbling drugs. For profit, of course. Is that the history of it? Is that actually what happened? Because if that is, weird. Really weird. Opium Wars? I gotta remember that. Opium Wars. Jeez, how bizarre. How bizarre. Okay, moving on. Surely the shogun reasoned it would not be long before Western powers began seeking trading rights with Japan. External pressure and internal revolt. Then, in 1853, a fleet of well-armed American ships commanded by Commander Matthew Perry, not from Friends, sailed into Tokyo Bay. Perry had a letter from the President of the United States. The letter demanded that Japan open its ports to diplomatic and commercial exchange. The shogun's advisors debated what to do. As Lord Lee noted, Japan did not have the ability to defend itself against the powerful United States Navy. The Treaty of Kanagawa in 1854, the shogun agreed to open up 2 Japanese ports to American ships, though not for trade. The United States soon won trading and other rights, including the right of extraterritoriality and the most favored nation clause. European nations demanded and won similar rights. Like the Chinese, the Japanese deeply resented the terms of these unequal treaties, which they found humiliating. Some bitterly criticized the shogun for not taking a strong stand against the foreigners. Foreign pressure deepened the social and economic unrest. In 1867, discontented daimyo and samurai led a revolt and unseated the shogun and restored a 15-year-old emperor to power. Whew. He moved from the old imperial capital of Kyoto to the shogun's palace in Edo and renamed Edo Tokyo, or Eastern Capital. So Tokyo means Eastern Capital. I didn't know that. I didn't know that at all. Tokyo means Eastern Capital. That's a little piece of knowledge I didn't know. Tokyo means Eastern Capital. Meiji Restoration. The young emperor began a long reign known as the Meiji Restoration. This period, which lasted from 1868 to 1912, was a major turning point in Japanese history. Meiji means enlightened rule. The Meiji reformers who ruled the emperor's in the emperor's name were determined to strengthen Japan. Their goal was summarized in their motto: a rich country, a strong military. The new leaders set out to study Western ways, adapt them to Japanese needs, and eventually beat Westerners at their own game. In 1871, members of the government traveled overseas to learn about Western governments, economies, technologies, and customs. The government brought experts from Western countries to Japan and sent young samurai to study abroad. I think the Japanese succeeded economically in their goals set out 100 and some odd years ago. Reforms under the Meiji new heading. The Meiji reformers faced an enormous task. They were committed to replacing the rigid feudal order with a completely new political and social system, and to building a new social system and to building a modern industrial economy. Change did not come easily. In the end, however, Japan adapted foreign ideas with amazing speed and success. Government reformers. Government. The reformers wanted to create a strong central government, equal to those of Western powers. After studying various European governments, they adapted the German model. In 1889, the emperor issued the Meiji Constitution. It set forth the principle that all citizens were equal before the law. Like the German system, however, it gave the emperor autocratic power. A legislature, or Diet, D-I-E-T, was formed, made up of one elected house and one house appointed by the emperor. Additionally, voting rights were sharply limited. Japan then established a Western-style bureaucracy with separate departments to supervise finance, the army, the navy, and education. To strengthen the military, it turned to Western technology and ended some special privileges of the samurai. In the past, samurai alone were warriors. In modern Japan, as well as the West, all men were subject to military service. Economic reforms. Meiji leaders made the economy a major priority. They encouraged Japan's business class to adopt Western methods. The government set up a banking system, built railroads, improved ports, and organized a telegraph and postal system. To get industries started, the government typically built factories and then sold them to wealthy businesses. Families who developed them further, which supported business dynasties like the Kawasaki family, soon ruled over industrial empires that rivaled those of the Rockefellers in the United States and the Krupps in Germany. These powerful banking industry families were known as the Zaibatsu. In the 1890s, industry was booming, with modern machines, silk manufacturing soared, shipyards Copper and coal mining and steel making also helped make Japan an industrial powerhouse. As in other industrial countries, the population grew rapidly, and many peasants flocked into growing cities for work. Social changes. Social change. The Constitution ended legal distinctions between classes, thus providing the opportunity for more people to become involved in nation building. The government set up schools and universities. It hired Westerners to teach the new generation modern technology. Despite the reforms, class distinctions survived in Japan as they did in the West. Also, although literacy increased and some women gained an education, women in general were still assigned to secondary role in society. You'll recall from about 6 months ago, I read a passage out of an ancient Japanese flyer that was posted on a tree. The flyer read, "If you find your wife drinking tea or walking in the forest, divorce her immediately." So, they say women in general were still assigned a secondary role in society. The secondary role that they say still is that they weren't allowed to drink tea before. The reform of the Japanese family system, the women's position in it, became a topic of major debates in the 1870s. Reformers wanted women to become full partners in the process of nation building and to learn skills that would allow them to live on their own, rather. Although the government agreed to some increases in... Where's this mouse? I need to see how much battery I have left. The computer's almost empty. Okay. Although the government agreed to increase in education for women, it dealt harshly with other attempts at change. In 1898, Japanese women were forbidden any political participation and were legally lumped together with minors. Amazing success. During the Meiji period, Japan modernized with amazing speed. Its success was due to a number of causes. It was a homogeneous society, that is, it had a common culture and language that gave it strong sense of identity. Economic growth during the Tokugawa times had set Japan on the road to development. Also, the Japanese had experienced a learning from the foreign nations, such as China. Like other people faced with Western imperialism, the Japanese were determined to resist foreign rule. In fact, in the 1890s, Japan was strong enough to force Western powers to revise the unequal treaties. By then, it was already acquiring its own overseas empire. Growing military strength. New heading. As with Western industrial powers, Japan's economic needs fed its imperialist desires. A small island nation, Japan lacked many basic resources that were essential for the industrial growth. Yet spurred by nationalism and strong ambition to equal the West, Japan built an empire. With its modern army and navy, it maneuvered for power in East Asia. What's bigger, Japan or Cuba? Because I was looking at a map and I thought, wow, Cuba's a lot bigger than I thought it was. Japan gains power. In 1894, competition between Japan and China led to the Sino-Japanese War. Although China had greater resources, Japan had benefited from modernization. To the surprise of China and the West, Japan won easily. It used its victory to gain treaty ports in China and control over island of Taiwan, thus joining the West in the race for empire. 10 years later, Japan successfully challenged Russia, its rival power in Korea and Manchuria. During the Russo-Japanese War, Japanese armies defeated Russian troops in Manchuria, and its navy destroyed almost an entire Russian fleet, Japan's navy. destroyed almost an entire Russian fleet. For the first time in modern history, an Asian power humbled a European nation. In 1905, the Treaty of Portsmouth, Japan gained control of Korea as well as rights of parts of Manchuria. I think this is why the Koreans don't like the Japanese. Competition for Korea. Imperialist rivalries put spotlight on Korea. Located at a crossroads of East Asia, the Korean peninsula was focus of competition among Russia, China, and Japan. Although Korea had long been influenced by its powerful neighbors, it had its own traditions and government. Like China and Japan, Korea had shut its doors to foreigners. It did, however, maintain relations with China and sometimes with Japan. By the 1800s, Korea faced pressure from the outside. As Chinese power declined, Russia expanded into East Asia. Then, as Japanese industrialized, it too eyed Korea. In 1876, Japan used its superior power to force Korea to open its ports to Japanese trade. Faced with similar demands from Western powers, the Hermit Kingdom had also accepted unequal treaties. As Japan extended its influence in Korea, it came into conflict with China, which still saw Korea as a tributary state. After defeating China and then Russia, Japan made Korea a protectorate. In 1910, it annexed Korea outright, absorbing the kingdom into the Japanese Empire. I'm pretty sure that's why the Koreans don't care for the Japanese very deeply. Obviously, there's exceptions, individuals. I'm sure that there's plenty of exceptions. Japan rules Korea. Japan ruled Korea for 35 years. Like Western imperialists, the Japanese set out to modernize their newly acquired territory. They built factories, railroads, and communication systems. Development, however, generally benefited Japan. Under Japanese rule, Koreans produced more rice than ever before, but most of it went to Japan. The Japanese were as unpopular in Korea as Western imperialists were elsewhere. They imposed harsh rule on their colony and deliberately set out to erase the Korean language and identity. There you have it. Repression bred resentment, and resentment in turn nourished a Korean nationalist movement. 9 years after annexation, a non-violent protest against the Japanese began on March 1st of 1919, and soon spread through Korea. The Japanese crushed the uprising and massacred many Koreans. The violence did not discourage people who worked to end Japanese rule. Instead, the March 1st movement became a rallying symbol for Korean nationalists. And we're ending our time today. My name is John Michael at the Context is Everything Media Network. Please like, please subscribe. Thank you. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your attention. God bless. Here it is. Looking ahead, the Koreans would have to wait many years for freedom. By the early 1900s, Japan was the strongest power in Asia. It continued to expand in East Asia during the years that followed, seeking natural resources and territory. In time, Japanese ambitions to control a sphere of influence in the Pacific would put it on a collision course with several Western powers, especially Britain and the United States. John Michael, Context is Everything Media Network. I hope you have a wonderful day. Enjoy the weather and all that. Get in the ocean water if you can. It's good for your hair. Bye-bye.